I have spent way too much time collecting this data to try to tell you that, yeah, you should draft wide receivers going into year two. A lot of the times, that's where the league winners come from. Now, of course, that doesn't mean draft every year two receiver. I'm going to show you all the data. I'm going to give you our takeaways, and hopefully I'm going to help you win some fantasy football leagues this season. But what we essentially did here is we went back to the year 2014, so the past 10 seasons. I tracked every wide receiver that was selected inside the first 3 rounds. The reason for this is there are a lot of guys that are selected in rounds 5, 6, 7. Yes, maybe you can point to, oh my gosh, remember when Stephon Diggs worked out back then? Remember when Antonio Brown worked out back then? Yeah, 1 out of every 50 of those guys is going to hit. Now, I'm not going to be able to predict those players at an accurate clip. It's a way too large of a sample for us to be able to try to do so. So instead, if we're focusing on players that were selected inside the first 3 rounds, it's just going to be way more concrete data that we're able to actually do stuff with. Even if maybe I'm not going to be able to talk about Puka Nacua in this video, I will let you know, draft Puka as a wide receiver 1 this season. Bam, done. We don't need to discuss him any longer. But anyway, so just to give you some examples of this, you look at 2014, you have like Sammy Watkins, his rookie season finishing as the wide receiver 31, and in year 2, he finishes as the wide receiver 11. We'll just run through this quickly so you can see all the data on the screen. You can pause it. You can fact check me, whatever you want. I will note that this is going to be half PPR. So 2015, you have like Amari Cooper. 2016, that's the Corey Coleman class. 2017, that's the Corey Davis class. I really thought Corey Davis was going to be something. I wish I could get back in a time machine, go back to college and scream at myself, only draft the running backs in your dynasty rookie drafts. Don't waste any picks with Corey Davis, but we did. 2018, that was the DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley year. 2019, that was the N'Keal Harry year. 2020, that was the CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, Henry Ruggs. 2021, you had Chase Waddle. 2022, you had London Wilson. And then the 2023 class, obviously, that's what this entire video is going to be about, figuring out if we should draft JSN, Quentin Johnson, Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison. Talk about it later on. But the takeaways that I wanted to look at in this video, 2 different things. One, I wanted to look at the wide receivers that were able to finish as top 36 options their rookie seasons, and essentially just figure out what do these guys do in year 2. Because if you are a top 36 wide receiver from a points per game perspective as a rookie, we can safely say that you hit. Now, of course, if you were drafted inside the top 5 NFL draft picks and you walk out a wide receiver 33 season, like Marvin Harrison Jr. is the wide receiver 33 this year. I don't know if we want to classify that as it, but nonetheless, you were relevant as a rookie. Okay. Here, the guys were Sammy Watkins, Mike Evans, Odell, Brandon Cooks, Kelvin Benjamin, Jordan Matthews, Amari Cooper, Michael Thomas, Juju Smith-Schuster. We don't need to go through it all. You can see it here. And what we did is we tracked these guys and what they did going into their second seasons. And just on average, where should you expect a wide receiver that hit as a top 36 rookie to be in year 2? And what we actually found was out of these 23 guys since the year 2014, you actually had 17 of them repeating as top 36 wide receivers. So more times than not, about 75% of the time, they are going to at least stay the same. They are not going to get worse. Now, the instances where these guys got worse, Kelvin Benjamin, he completely falls off the map. I think we all remember that. I mean, the man, I don't know what he was eating, but he could not stop. I'm sure the chef was cooking up some divine food. Deebo Samuel had a slow year 2, which is funny because Brandon Ayuk did as well. Looks like Kyle Shanahan goes, yeah, we'll use you as a rookie, but I don't want to get your head a little too big. So we're going to pull you back for your second season. Chase Claypool was a little bit too focused in on TikTok, so you saw the Claypool fall off. Garrett Wilson actually fell from wide receiver 31 to wide receiver 40. I think this has more to do with his overall offensive situation. Tomato, doesn't really matter. And then Christian Watson had the fall off where he just wasn't able to stay healthy last season, fell from wide receiver 30 to wide receiver 42. But those were only 6 instances out of this entire list, right? It's way more likely that these guys actually continue to get better. So it's very interesting is if we look at the guys that finished inside the top 24 here, you actually had 15 out of 23. That was good for a 65% clip. So more likely than not, if you finish as a top 36 wide receiver year 1, you'll finish as a top 24 option your second season. Duh, rookies are going to continue to get better. I think that's the base expectation for everybody. And then if you're looking at the guys that finished inside the top 12, you have Odell Beckham Jr. finishing as the wide receiver 3. You have Sammy Watkins finishing as the wide receiver 11. Michael Thomas finishing as the wide receiver 9, Juju Smith-Schuster, wide receiver 10, Cooper Kupp, wide receiver 11, A.J. Brown, wide receiver 6, Justin Jefferson, wide receiver 4, Jamar Chase, wide receiver 5. You have 7 instances, good for about a 30% clip of these guys being wide receiver 1s in fantasy. And I know 30% doesn't seem super high, but if you tell me that a wide receiver that we're getting at wide receiver 30 in fantasy drafts right now is a 30% chance to be a top 12 guy, I will take it. Now, of course, we'll look at these prices later on, and I'll try to help out in what year 2 wide receiver we should be drafting this season. Now, I wanted to narrow it down a little bit more and only look at the guys that had really strong rookie seasons. If you're a top 36 player, we can just kind of assume, okay, you're on the radar, you're on the map. If you're looking at the guys that finished inside the top 24, these are guys that had great rookie years. Mike Evans, Odell, Brandon Cooks, Kelvin Benjamin, Michael Thomas, Juju Smith-Schuster, Justin Jefferson, Ayuk, Chase, and Waddle. Here, there were 10 instances. 8 out of 10 of those guys finished as top 36 options the following season. Good for an 80% clip. 7 out of 10 of them finished for a top 24 season. Good for a 70% clip. And then 4 out of 10 of them finished as a top 12 option. Good for a 40% chance. So it's almost a 50-50 shot that if you drafted a wide receiver that was a top 24 option in year 1, that the following year in year 2, he was going to be a top 12 option. Now let's go through and let's talk about the wide receivers that actually managed to hit some of these thresholds. So like I said, I'm not going to be looking at Puka Nacua. Puka just put up the best rookie wide receiver season, arguably of all time. Draft him as a borderline round 1, round 2 pick based off your league settings. I'm not breaking any major news here telling you to draft Puka. Everybody knows that he is good. Everybody knows he is set up for a very strong year 2. The guys I want to be focusing in on will be Zay Flowers, Jordan Addison, Jaden Reed, Rashee Rice, and Tank Dell. These are the 5 receivers that finished as top 36 options at the very minimum. And let's look at the situations that they have going into this next year. Because a lot of people, and what they don't understand what we do with these videos, is they'll go, oh my gosh, Mason, I mean, thanks for giving us the numbers, but you clown, do you not even know the situation this guy is in? Don't you know he's playing alongside DK? Trust me, I get it. We talk about the situation in every single video. What you do is you look at the raw expectation with the numbers, you add the overall context to it, and then you try to have a nuanced take about the player expectation this next season. So the numbers are driving a lot of things. You kind of twist and turn it based off the context that he was in year 1, based off the context he'll be in this season. So we got to go one by one with these players. Talking about our first guy in Zay Flowers here, ladies and gentlemen. Last season, Zay Flowers steps in as a rookie wide receiver, finds himself in a pretty good spot in a very good offense in Baltimore, very little target competition, and Flowers has himself a decent season, right? I mean, this is a wide receiver that comes out and gives you almost 13 fantasy points per game. He gives you almost 5 receptions per game, almost 7 targets per contest, and 53 receiving yards per game as well. If you look at what he did at 23 years old and comp it to 23-year-old wide receivers since the year 2000, you have A.J. Green, Dwayne Bowe, Antonio Brown, Jeremy Maclin, Willie Snead, Ruben Randall, Corin Robinson, Jerry Jeudy, and Rashee Rice. Talk about Rice in just one second. But really the upside that you have here is with someone like A.J. Green, right? Where A.J. Green the following year in his age 24 season goes out and averages 19 points per contest. So the question that we have to ask ourselves now with Zay Flowers is how are you going to be able to project out his target share this next season? Because if you look at this wide receiver depth chart, I would make the argument, yeah, they add Tez Walker. Yeah, they resigned Rashad Bateman. But this is one of the thinnest wide receiver rooms that you're going to find in the NFL. They lose Odell Beckham Jr. You really just have Zay Flowers and a couple tight ends here. So I think it's a very safe projection to have Flowers at a 20% team target share in Baltimore this next season. Maybe it's a little aggressive, but if you go ahead and if you look at where he's currently getting drafted, Flowers is going as the wide receiver 26. And based off this historical data, like we've said, the baseline expectation with these guys that are, I don't know, sitting here and going into year 2 after a top 36 finish is the base expectation is that there is a 65% chance that they are a top 24 wide receiver. So more likely than not, based off the historical data, Zay Flowers should project out as a top 24 option this season with about a 30% chance to be a top 12 guy. Now, I understand, limited sample. I'm not going to be using these numbers as the gospel. So we are going to be checking in on the situation. And like I already said, I think the situation's fine for Zay Flowers. Great quarterback play and very little target competition. And then you go over and look at what you actually have with Zay Flowers' overall projection on Underdog Pick'ems at the moment. So you have Flowers in Underdog drafts going at wide receiver 26. You have Flowers' Underdog projection at 6.5 receiving touchdowns, higher, lower. And you have him at about 925 receiving yards, higher, lower. Which if you actually cross-reference him with some of the other wide receivers in that range, those are pretty respectable projections overall. Now, one thing that I want to do is, I already know I'm completely fine drafting Zay Flowers at wide receiver 25 on an Underdog if you need a wide receiver at that pick. A lot of times I'll go Sam Laporta. A lot of times I'll go Travis Kelce if I don't need a receiver. But I want to see, where is he going in normal fantasy football leagues? Where is he going in like the casual ESPN league where you're going to be drafting with your high school buddies? Here's Zay Flowers, the wide receiver 24. Obviously, he has a later ADP overall. He's going down at pick 62, which is a big reason why if you're just drafting with your college buddies, go ahead, just take running backs early because you can get Zay Flowers in round 6 and you can crush them. But yeah, here I think that it's a reasonable price point to have him wide receiver 24. The overall ranking seems a little bit low, but he'd be a perfect example of someone that in your casual format, I'd be perfectly fine starting off with a couple of running backs out the gate and an elite tight end, and then getting Zay Flowers, my wide receiver 2 in round 6. And then on Underdog, I'm honestly kind of fine with where he's going as well. In terms of if we're going to go higher or lower on the 925.5 receiving yards, that's going to be up to you. I mean, personally, I think it's too close of a projection where I'm not really going to be touching it. I don't think there's a ton of value on either side. But if you disagree with me, if you think that Zay Flowers is easily going to crush that, you can find the link to join an Underdog draft with us, or maybe check out any of those pick'ems on Underdog in the description, in the comment section. The drafts on Underdog are best ball, so there's no time commitment at all during the year. It's how I draft hundreds of teams every offseason. It's how I won $150,000 on Underdog 2 years ago. And if you use code FLOCK, you will get our 2024 Fantasy Football Draft Guide. You'll get our 2024 Fantasy Football Rankings. You will get a 50% deposit bonus up to $250. And Underdog is available in pretty much every state. You can see the map right here. But let's move over to some of these other receivers. And I'm going to be very brief with our next guy. My most drafted player before his DUI, and we'll see now, was Jordan Addison in Underdog drafts. This was a wide receiver that was going at wide receiver 39 at the time of this recording. That was his ADP. He was right in between Rome and Rice. Now, I am telling you from what I've seen over the past few days on Underdog, I recently got Jordan Addison about 30 picks past ADP. I am thinking that Addison's more likely than not going to fall behind like the Jameson Williams range due to the possible suspension. Of course, I'm not an attorney. I wish I was. Trust me, I'd save a ton of money if I was. It'd be phenomenal. So I can't tell you exactly how much time Jordan Addison's going to be missing here, but he is at threat to actually serve a suspension. What's very interesting, if you look at his Underdog projection, they still have him at 6.5 receiving touchdowns. They still have him at 825.5 receiving yards. Just looking at the base expectation, this is another guy that was a top 36 player his rookie season. He was the wide receiver 28. If you go and look at his historical comps based off his age 21 year, you had Akeem Nicks, Larry Fitzgerald, Juju Smith-Schuster, T. Higgins, CeeDee Lamb, Percy Harvin, Jeremy Maclin, Elijah Moore, averaging pretty much about 15 to 16 points per game in their age 22 season. So the normal projection for Jordan Addison going into this next year, based off his rookie year, just the raw numbers, would have Jordan Addison as a low-end wide receiver 1, high-end wide receiver 2. If he followed the path of everybody else that performed the way he did at 21 years old. Now, obviously, we're not stopping there. We're adding context because trust me, I get it. Kirk Cousins is gone. I understand. It's Darnold. It's McCarthy. It's bad quarterback play in Minnesota. The passing volume goes down. Now, I will say Kirk Cousins only played 8 games last season. The second thing that we got to point out is a lot of these statistics that Jordan Addison posted at 21 were in games where Justin Jefferson did not play. So Jefferson being fully healthy this next season will drive down the target share for Jordan Addison. Now, some of that may be outweighed with the departure of KJ Osborne, who had 75 targets last season. Some of that may be, I don't know, outweighed by TJ Hawkinson missing the beginning of the season, who had 127 targets last season. So you have the vacated targets for Jordan Addison, presumably driving Addison even higher than what his natural projection would be at wide receiver 14-ish. You have the overall worst situation with Jefferson being fully healthy and no Kirk Cousins, driving that projection lower. If I was sitting here based off the raw numbers, like I said, maybe project him out to be wide receiver 16-ish. Based off the context, I think it would be more reasonable to rank Jordan Addison around wide receiver 30 because we have to drive him lower due to the situation that he's in. It's not a secret to anybody. But I like this price of wide receiver 39. Drafted the hell out of him. Now I think it's going to be much, much tougher. I'm going over to Jayden Reed. Jayden Reed was the wide receiver 24 this past season. Jayden Reed, definitely an older rookie, going to be 24 years old this next year. What's very interesting is if you actually look at Jayden Reed's underdog pick'em, they only have Reed at 4.5 receiving touchdowns and 775.5 receiving yards, which is significantly lower than Jordan Addison, where Jordan Addison's at 6.5 receiving touchdowns, 825.5 receiving yards. But funny enough, Jayden Reed is being drafted at the wide receiver 39. He's being drafted a full round ahead of Addison. Pre-DUI, now Addison's going to be falling a ton, of course. So honestly, if you think Addison gets suspended, I would probably look to go with you lower than 6.5 receiving touchdowns for Jordan Addison this year. But Jayden Reed, I'm okay with him at wide receiver 34. It is interesting that he's like the only guy that we've talked about so far that I would be interested in possibly a higher underdog pick'em on either 4.5 receiving touchdowns or 775.5 receiving yards. Going over to Rashee Rice. Rice in a very similar situation to what we were talking about with Jordan Addison, and that his ADP is going to be depressed just simply based off the looming suspension. Don't know what it's going to be like. I wish I did. But if you do look at the guys that he's historically comped to at 23 years old, you have Nate Burleson, who did nothing the next year. You had Jerry Jeudy, Willie Snead, Dwayne Bowe. The upside here is Des Bryant, Terry McLaurin. They were at 19 and 15.1 points per game the following season at 24. But with Rice also, I mean, if you look at how the situation's changed going into this next year, you have the addition of Hollywood Brown. I'm not a big Hollywood guy, definitely not drafting him at ADP. You have the addition of Xavier Worthy. So the target share should naturally go down for Rice. And at the same time, you don't have the guarantee that he plays all 17 games this season. So, I mean, Rice is fine where he's priced at. Specifically, right now, he is going at wide receiver 40 in underdog drafts. I'm imagining he's going to jump Jordan Addison by the time you watch this. He's already going higher than him now. But he has been a riser. I mean, Rashee Rice may end up getting drafted as a low-end wide receiver 3. I think it's going to be very dependent on the league and if you want to draft Rice. Checking in on ESPN, Rashee Rice going as the wide receiver 34, which is a phenomenal pick if you can put suspended players on your IR. If you can draft Rashee Rice in your regular redraft league, throw him on the IR, have an extra bench spot that you can go through and churn the waiver wire at the beginning of the season, take Rice, don't think twice. However, if you have to waste the bench spot and you have to go through and put Rashee Rice on your bench for the first 6 weeks of the year in case he gets suspended, do not be drafting Rashee Rice at wide receiver 34 and clogging up your roster. Now, in underdog drafts, if you're in like Best Ball Mania, which is where you really need to be optimizing for points in weeks 15, 16, 17, and you just need to be chasing the highest ceiling possible if you're trying to turn like $25 on a $1.5 million, immaculate. Take Rashee Rice at his price. However, if you're in like the marathon contest on Underdog where it's just cumulative scoring throughout the entire season, don't take him. If he misses games there, it's going to be tough. If you're in the eliminator draft on Underdog where at the end of every single week, the lowest teams in the league get knocked off, you need points at the beginning of the season, so I'm probably not taking Rashee Rice there either. So I definitely think Rice and Addison, now that Addison has the looming suspension, it really is going to depend on your league settings on if you're going to draft them or not. Now, this is what we really need to discuss. And it is tough for me to look at myself and I don't know why. I don't know what I have against Tank Dell. I do not want to pay this Tank Dell price tag. But Tank Dell, last year's rookie wide receiver, was the wide receiver 16 from a points per game perspective. As we were doing the research for the draft guide, what really shocked me is 2 key statistics. The main one with Tank Dell averaged 101 intended air yards per game as a rookie. If you don't know what an intended air yard is, say Tank Dell runs 10 yards down the field, CJ Stroud throws it to him 10 yards from the line of scrimmage. Tank Dell catches it, runs another 10 yards and gets tackled. He has 20 receiving yards and 10 intended total air yards. Say Tank Dell runs 30 yards past the line of scrimmage. CJ Stroud launches it. Tank Dell drops it, or maybe it goes over his head or whatever. But if he got the target 30 yards down the line of scrimmage, then he gets 30 intended air yards. This is actually very predictive in trying to figure out what the volume looks like for these wide receivers the next season. And intended air yards are a very, very good thing. 101 is freaking nuts for a rookie, especially for Tank Dell's situation. Two things that I have against Tank Dell that could very easily be irrational, but I'm gonna let you know. One, Tank Dell is an extreme outlier in the historical context. If we go through and look at wide receivers since the year 2000 that weighed 165 pounds or less, you have Tank Dell, who was the best wide receiver ever at this size last season. Doesn't matter if you're a rookie or it doesn't matter if you're an 8-year vet, 16.5 points per game. Then after that, you have J.J. Nelson, Taylor Gabriel, and those are the only other two wide receivers since the year 2000 at this size that were able to average more than 10 points per game in a season. Massive, massive outlier in that way. The other thing that I have against Tank Dell, and like I said, this could be very irrational, and you may not want to listen to me specifically with Dell. I did not draft Tank Dell last year. Maybe I'm just upset with myself for not taking him. That could be it. But while I want to give Tank Dell all his flowers for having a phenomenal rookie season, Tank Dell was drafted at 24 years old. Tank Dell played last year at 24. In October this season, he turns 25. Just for reference, let's pull up Kyle Pitts' age and compare it. Kyle Pitts is a full year younger than Tank Dell. Dell was born in October of 99. Pitts was born in October of 2000. And Kyle Pitts has been in the NFL for approximately 10 seasons by now. Trust me, because I'm drafting him every year like an idiot. So I do want to give a discount to Tank Dell's rookie season. So what I'm going to do here is we're going to look at wide receivers that had a similar age 24 year to Tank Dell, not just a rookie season. You had Chris Godwin, Devontae Adams, Amari Cooper, Tyler Boyd, Jalen Waddle, DK Metcalf, Santana Moss, Allen Hurns, Tank Dell, Nico Collins. The following season, these guys were good. They averaged 14, 15 points per game. Now, obviously, the way that the situation has changed going into this next season is you add in Stephon Diggs, a wide receiver that has historically seen a 25% team target share. It's probably hard to project him out to see that in Houston at this point of his career. But I don't know. All the data says Tank Dell absolutely crushes this next season. I have had a hard time buying into it, but if we're looking at his ADP and his price right now, a couple different things. One, the underdog projected pick'em, 4.5 receiving touchdowns, 825.5 receiving yards. Very, very reasonable. If you wanted to go take the higher on 4.5 receiving touchdowns, I would not fault you for it. Tank Dell's wide receiver 25 on Underdog. My main issue is I'd rather have Sam Laporta. I'd rather have Josh Allen. I'd rather have Travis Kelce, who are going after Tank Dell. Tank Dell in ESPN leagues at the moment is the wide receiver 26. He is going at pick 70. So if you're drafting an Underdog, you have to take Tank Dell in round 3 because the wide receiver prices are extremely, extremely high. If you are in your regular redraft league with your college buddies, you get Tank Dell in round 6, round 7, possibly. So Tank Dell, round 6, round 7, I am completely fine with. His profile makes so much sense to take there. In Underdog drafts, I personally I've been having a hard time. I completely understand if you are willing to go out there and pay that price because the historical data says he should be pretty damn good. I just have a hard time with these outliers. Now, you know what? We're going to make this an extremely long video. We're going to dive into everything for y'all here. I'm not going to spend too much time with JSN and Quentin Johnston, but what we also did with this, because we have all the data at our disposal, is I wanted to look at wide receivers that completely face planted. Did absolutely nothing as a rookie. And remember, we are only looking at guys that were drafted in rounds 1, 2, and 3 here. I don't even want to list them all out and maybe Thomas, you can throw a scrolling list here. Everybody can see, and maybe I post the link to this on flockfantasy.com. We'll see, and y'all can check out all my data. But anyway, since the year 2014, you had 79 wide receivers that were selected inside the first 3 rounds that did not post a top 50 season from a points per game perspective as a rookie. If we look at those players and what they did in year 2, for them to then follow it up with a top 36 season, remember, if you finished as the top 36 option in year 1, you had a 74% chance to do it again the next year. Here, you only had a 12% chance. Only 10 guys did it. If you wanted to finish as the top 24 guy the following season, after not being a top 50 player year 1, only 1 player did it. You had a 1.26% chance. That's compared to 65% of the guys that actually finished as top 36 options in their first seasons. Now, that one guy that did it, I believe, was DJ Moore. I can go through. Yes, DJ Moore was the wide receiver 54 as a rookie, wide receiver 21 as a year 2 player. But the guys that finished inside the top 12 after doing absolutely nothing as a rookie, 0. At least over the past 10 years, we just simply haven't seen it. Now, I do want to point out that that doesn't mean that these guys can't do anything at all in their NFL careers. You actually have a few names on this list of guys that completely face-planted year 1. It took them a decent amount of time to get things going. And if you bought in on Davante Adams in year 2 from a dynasty perspective, you printed money. Obviously, it was one of the best decisions you could have ever made. So I don't want to sit here and say these guys that face-planted year 1 don't have the option to get better later on in their NFL career, but specifically from a redraft perspective, looking at their second seasons. Now, you may say, well, Mason, come on, man. This is unfair. If we're looking at Jackson Smith-Njigba, if we were looking at Quentin Johnston, these were wide receivers that were round 1 picks. Why are we comparing them to round 3 guys? Fair point. So if we filtered this data down and we only look at the face planners from round 1 over the past 10 seasons, you had 20 guys. Let's run through the list because it's funny. Kevin White, Devontae Parker, Nelson Aguilar, Brashad Perriman, Philip Dorsett, Corey Coleman, Will Fuller, Josh Dotson, Laquan Treadwell, Corey Davis, Mike Williams, John Ross, DJ Moore, N'Keal Harry, Henry Ruggs, Jerry Jeudy, Jalen Reagor, Kadarius Toney, Rashad Bateman, Treylon Burks. If you look at what these guys did in year 2, 4 of them were top 36 options. You had Will Fuller, you had DJ Moore, you had Mike Williams, and you had Henry Ruggs. One of them was inside the top 24. That was DJ Moore. And 0 of them were inside the top 12. So this is where the nuance comes in. I can sit here and I want to let you know Jackson Smith-Njigba was the wide receiver 60. He falls onto this same list with all this same data. Quentin Johnston, not even close to wide receiver 60. Absolute bomb. So if we're sitting here, the historical data tells us that they roughly have a 20% chance to be top 36 options in fantasy this next year, a 5% chance to be a top 24 option. And over the past 10 seasons, we've never seen someone like this go out and break out as a top 12 guy in their second seasons. We've seen Davante Adams do it later on in his NFL career, but it took him some time if you face planted year 1. Now, this is where the nuance comes in, and you can say, well, Mason, Seattle ran a lot of 2 wide receiver sets last season with only DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett. Now they're going to run a lot of 3 wide receiver sets with this new coaching staff. Mason, Jackson Smith-Njigba was just a horrible situation last year. Keep in mind, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett are still on the team. Geno Smith's still the quarterback. So the only thing that's changed with this situation, if that's what held JSN back, was the change with the coaching staff. So if you want to say they're going to run a lot, they're going to run way more 3 wide receiver sets. They're going to throw the ball way more, and that's what's going to elevate Jackson Smith-Njigba. That's fine, and I'm going to rank him as if he has a pretty good shot to be a top 36 wide receiver. I really liked him as a prospect. Hell, I like Quentin Johnston as a prospect as well. It's just about setting realistic expectations so you're not coming out here expecting that JSN is top 12 upside for this next season and drafting him as if he does. And then same thing about Quentin Johnston. But looking at the price tag of these players at the moment, JSN going into this next year, specifically on Underdog, has a 775.5 receiving yard total, which seems really aggressive for this pick'em, seems really aggressive for this projection, where you look at the Jackson Smith-Njigba receiving yard projection, And these are pick'ems. You can go higher. You can go lower. You can put real United States dollars on this. It's the same as Jaden Reed. So that is interesting to point out. I personally probably go on the lower side of that, but that's just me. He's going as the wide receiver 46 on Underdog drafts. So I am completely fine with you taking him at wide receiver 46 on Underdog. Is if you take him at wide receiver 46 and you go, I understand, more likely than not, he's not a top 24 receiver, which is why I'm not taking him at wide receiver 20. But I just want to see if we can take him. He's a wide receiver 3 this season. He's a wide receiver 2 this season. I think maybe from a dynasty perspective, he even gets better when Tyler Lockett leaves in 2026 or 2025, excuse me. But just have realistic expectations. And on Underdog, if you draft someone at wide receiver 46, they turn out to be the wide receiver 30, it's a profitable pick. It's a very strong selection. However, if we go through and if we instead look at your regular ESPN draft and you take JSN at wide receiver 42, he turns out to be the wide receiver 30, it probably doesn't matter. Probably doesn't really make a difference for your team. And then the same thing with Quentin Johnston. With Johnston, he's being drafted as the wide receiver 70 at the moment. So, yeah, am I coming out here surprising anybody saying he's probably not a top 24 guy this next season? I'm not. I've actually embarrassingly drafted Quentin Johnston despite me bearing his grave in the past few videos. I've drafted a lot of them just because wide receiver 70, all these guys are probably bad. I don't need to tell you Demario Douglas is probably not having a great year either. But I hope we're able to help you out here with all this data. Long story short, probably good drafting wide receivers going into year 2 if they had good year 1s. If they had bad year 1s, historically speaking, it's not super exciting, but a lot of people have figured this out. So depending on the platform you're on, depending on the draft that you're in, maybe it's already priced in with JSN. Maybe it's already priced in with Quentin Johnston that these guys don't have a good shot for the following year. So maybe you can go ahead and take them if you think that there is upside for them to be top 24 options. Just don't expect wide receiver 1 seasons. But I've rambled on for way too long. Appreciate you. Hope you have a great day. And yeah, really hope I get to see you in the live stream. You know, we'll be drafting tonight.